On today's show, I will react to Trae Young making All-NBA and the impact of that, both for him and also for the Atlanta Hawks in the future. Beyond that, some reporting out there on Deandre Ayton and Zach LaVine and other things for the Hawks. Lots to get to on this Tuesday into Wednesday, and all of that and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1246 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday evening into Wednesday. And thank you for joining us, as always, on the podcast and making us your first listen each and every day. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode is just me talking about all kinds of different things. Honestly, kind of a jam-packed show out of nowhere. Might be a little bit shorter than usual, but still, 3-4 topics to get to. I knew the All-NBA was coming down, which we'll talk about here in a second, about Trae Young and the impact of him making All-NBA. Congratulations to Trae Young for doing that. And also, we got a column from Jake Fischer, an insider at Bleacher Report, about some Hawks-related stuff that I'll tackle later on in the episode. I do want to plug a few things. I've been very busy on the podcast recently. Glenn Willis has joined me. Robbie Callan joined me last night. We had Andrew Kelly for a 2-part episode earlier last week. Glenn, a few different times. Wall-to-wall coverage. I've actually already recorded a few more episodes. I actually have to travel a lot the next 2 weeks. I'm trying to bank some stuff that will hold. I'll be talking to Glenn a couple more times minimum. I'll also record with Kevin Chenard of Hawks.com on a podcast that's going to be airing at some point in the near future, some draft stuff that I will hold on and telling you just yet about. But plenty of coverage coming, and please subscribe to the podcast. With all that out of the way, the headliner of the evening is Trae Young making All-NBA. Not a huge surprise. In fact, I would have bet on him making it at some point, although it was definitely more comfortable in the end in the margin than I probably would have guessed. But as I've said a number of times on this show, if you're a new listener, you might not know this, but I've been saying for months at this point that Trae should make All-NBA. He had an All-NBA resume that was as clear as day to me. I thought that he was in some level of trouble when it comes to making All-NBA until like the middle of March when the Hawks closed well. He closed well, had the numbers and all of that stuff, but he definitely earned it. He did finish 6th among guards, but that's all he had to do. Just for if you missed this, basically Trae gets a contract bump by making All-NBA. It did not matter first team, second team, third team. I'm sure he would have preferred to be first or second team, but third team pays the same as second team or first team, and he finished 6 of 6, but it was pretty comfortable by that point. As far as the first team was concerned, Giannis was the only guy that was actually unanimous. Jokic was not unanimous because of the center thing with him and Joel Embiid. I will not go through the entire ballots because this is sort of a Hawks-only podcast in a lot of ways, but on the guard line, it was in order. Luka Doncic first, then Devin Booker, John Morant, Steph Curry, Chris Paul was 5th, and it was pretty close between Chris Paul and Trae Young, and then Trae was, of course, 6th. So in theory, if I just tell you that, it might have seemed pretty close to Trae not making it, but a step further, it actually wasn't close at all. Trae got 11 second-team votes, no first-team votes, but 11 second-team votes, and 77 third-team votes. So he was on 88 of the 100 ballots. That in itself pretty much guaranteed him being on no matter what happened. But the next closest guard, the guy who finished 7th among guards, was Donovan Mitchell, who was on 4 ballots. So Trae was on 88 ballots. Donovan Mitchell was on 4 ballots. That tells you the difference there. A comfortable, although 6 of 6 is one thing, but it was definitely comfortable. No real threat to Trae not making it. And again, personally, I would have had him second team. To be honest, I would have had him in that 3 or 4 range. I know I was probably higher on him than most throughout the course of the season, but I thought Trae had a fantastic year. If you missed it in the past or just sort of want a refresher about Trae's season, I won't spend too much time on this, but it's worth just kind of noting all the things that he did this year. He becomes, by the way, the 8th player in Hawks history to make an All-NBA team in his first 4 seasons, and the 13th guy overall in Hawks history to make it. The headliner was, of course, that he led the entire NBA in total points, total assists this year. The second player in NBA history to do that, behind only Tiny Archibald in 72-73. He has all kinds of franchise marks from this season, and he was just fantastic all the way through. 42 double-doubles of points and assists that led the entire NBA this year as well. He was Conference Player of the Week, all that fun stuff. We'll have a full player capsule on him. I know I've been doing those with Glenn Willis recently, but I'll have a full breakdown of Trae for like probably 30-plus minutes in the future. But in terms of his season, career high in assists this year, 9.7 per game, career highs in field goal percentage and 2-point percentage, 3-point percentage, free throw percentage, true shooting percentage, effective field goal percentage, all the shooting categories. He was number 1 in his career so far. It's been a heck of a career so far also for Trae. And again, led the league in total assists and total points. Also led the league in assist rate. He was in the top 2 or 3 in assists per game, top 10 in points per game. Also an extremely durable player. And for me, I do value that in terms of the overall value of what a season looks like. He was number 8 in the entire NBA this year in total minutes played. So that tells you he was out there all the time. The Hawks obviously had kind of a rough year, but they were still pretty good when he played. Obviously, the offense was awesome when he played this year. He was the catalyst for all of that. And if you want to go a step further to the advanced metrics, multiple of the ones that are more trustworthy for me, like EPM and Raptor, had Trae as the second best offensive player in the league this season, behind only Jokic, who won the MVP award. Even if you don't think that's necessarily the case, I think for me, he was comfortably a top 5 or 6 offensive player in the entire NBA this year. Obviously, the defense is what it is, but he was still a top 12 player in the league, according to both EPM and Raptor, in overall value. That includes the defense and the negative there. So obviously, it's a top 15 kind of award, and the guard line at the end was not terribly exciting along the way there. I think he probably should have been ahead of Chris Paul, to be frank. But clearly, Trae earned it. He had a fantastic season. And with that, there is one sort of fallout. I sort of referenced it earlier, but there is some salary cap impact. If you missed it earlier in the offseason, I did a pretty extensive, like 15-minute breakdown of the Hawks salary cap. I will not do that again today, but basically, a lot of things changed for the Hawks in terms of what they owe on the cap now because Trae did this. At the end of March, the NBA released an updated salary cap projection for next season of $122 million. And by the way, that also includes a luxury tax line in the high 140s. If that holds, and I think it probably will at this point in time, Trae's going to make about $6.1 million more next season because he made all NBA. That's just in one season. And from this point forward, if that projection holds, he'll make $36.6 million next year, then $39.5 million, $42.4 million, then $45.4 million in year 4. And it's a player option at the end of the contract in year 5. But it's about an $8 million difference for year 5 between what he was going to make and what he's going to make now if he chooses to exercise that player option. And it's about $48.3 million in year 5. The total value gap that Trae made in just tonight, basically, even if we were sort of projecting it along the way, he's going to make $35.4 million more over the next 5 seasons because he made All NBA versus him not making All NBA. So it's a huge, huge factor for him. Obviously, a great night for Trae and Trae's family and Trae's agent and everybody else that's involved. But obviously, there's some impact for the Hawks as well. It definitely does not make life easier for the Hawks. I've talked about this before, but it's kind of a weird situation where the Hawks actually benefit if he doesn't make it, although they can't possibly say that on the record. But over the life of a 5-year deal, it goes from 5 years and $176 million to about 5 years and $212 million. That's a huge difference. And for next year, with salary cap and luxury tax concerns, Bobby Marks had it now. If they were to keep Gallo right now and do nothing else, they would be like $8 million over the tax line already with no DeLon or any of that stuff. I recommend listening to that podcast that I did earlier in the offseason for more detailed breakdown. But basically, this adds $6 million or so to next year's bill. And it will be very interesting to see how Tony Ressler handles all of that because clearly it's going to be not going anywhere on that. But if that makes the Hawks trim elsewhere because Tony has some financial constraints, it could have an impact. So all that said, congrats to Trae. It's going to be interesting to see how the Hawks navigate all of this stuff financially in the future with the tax line for this year and beyond. But he'll be making a lot more money in the future. Obviously, he was not hurting in the first place, but certainly a big night at the office for Trae. In fact, he was the only player this year that actually had that bump. A couple other guys that were eligible for it, but got nowhere close. So coming into the night is basically in the entire league, the will they or won't they was just Trae, and he ended up making it. And there you go on that. A lot more money coming his way in the near future. Okay, with all of that out of the way, we'll have more on the kind of a weird day and kind of a busy day unexpectedly for the Hawks because of the piece from Jake Fischer, a Bleacher Report. I'm going to take you through all of that with my reaction, sort of interpretation of what was written by Jake, who is a very smart person, by the way. I'll get to all of that in a second, but first, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar, and I love brownies. You know what I love more, though? Brownie batter. Sometimes I actually eat half the batter while I'm just making the brownies. And imagine if you could look that brownie spatula clean and get actually some valued protein in the process. If that's something you thought about before, and I definitely have, you're actually in luck because Built has a new creation. It's actually better than ever. It's the Brownie Batter Puff. You heard me right. This Puff Bar takes protein to a new level, and they have all kinds of availability right now at Built.com. You haven't tried the puffs yet? I'm not really sure what you're waiting on at this point. I've been telling you about them for a while, but 140 calories, 17 grams of protein, only 7 grams of sugar in brownie batter puffs, and they're perfect pick-me-up for each and every day. All Built Puffs have 100% real chocolate on the outside. That means with Built, you're going to actually eat healthy and enjoy doing it at the same time. They're also made with collagen protein, which your body can absorb more efficiently, and they have tons of health benefits along the way. Brownie Batter Puffs will have you clearly forgetting what you're actually eating. A protein bar. It doesn't even taste like a protein bar. It's actually like a candy bar, but it's actually healthy in the process. No need to pitch yourself. It's actually real life. Built.com has all of what you need right now for Brownie Batter Puffs and more. Go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCK15 when you get there. If you do that, 50% off on your order with Built Bar. That is promo code LOCK15, 15% off at Built.com. All right, so we'll dive in now to the non-Trae portion of the podcast. And again, sort of unplanned here. I was going to do the Trae stuff regardless of what happened on Tuesday. Will he or won't he? But the rest of this was kind of newsy from Tuesday morning. I got a lot of questions. I'm not going to answer questions in mailbag style, but just say I'm going to answer them in the course, at least a lot of the ones that I got today over the course of the next two segments. So just keep that in mind. But there was an intriguing sort of intel piece from Jake Fischer, Bleacher Report, on Tuesday. Jake is very plugged in. He's actually been in front of a lot of stuff in the last couple of years. So this is a real guy with real reporting. This is not, obviously, he's not quite as entrenched as Woj and Shams, but he's been breaking a lot of stuff for a while, and Jake is very smart. Keep that in mind as well. A lot going in that piece that was not Hawks related. So some of it is, and we'll go over that now. I'm going to kind of give you what was written by Jake and sort of interpret it for you on some level. And again, I'm sort of reading between the lines. I'm not talking to Jake about this right now. I'd love to, though. So Jake, come on the podcast. But the first thing I'll start with is that he wrote the following. He said, there are three teams most often linked by league personnel to Deandre Ayton as a potential suitor on the open market. And those teams are the Hawks, the Pistons, and the Portland Trail Blazers. This is very interesting, although I would point out for the first of many times on this podcast today that Jake is not reporting interest from the Hawks. He is saying, again, read that again. He's relaying the fact that league personnel, quote unquote, are linking Ayton to it as a potential suitor by the Hawks. So like there's a lot of hedging there. That's a meaningful difference. If you read the piece, there's times where he is citing direct sources in the piece about other things. And there are times where he's kind of speaking more broadly about league sources or rival executives or league personnel. Those are different kind of things. I know I'm sort of a media nerd in some respects, but that is definitely worth pointing out. But anyway, the Hawks linked there to DeAndre Ayton by Jake. Then he writes, if the Suns were to let DeAndre Ayton walk, by the way, he's a free agent this offseason, he's restricted though. League officials expect Phoenix to try and engineer a sign and trade for some front court help. He did say that would require some tricky cap calculations. This is me now, but one of the reasons why the Hawks make some sense as a potential partner for DeAndre Ayton, beyond the fact that he's a good young player, is that the Hawks can send back an above average, quality starting center in Clint Capella. And obviously the Suns are in win now mode with Chris Paul and Devin Booker. So that makes a lot of sense. It is worth noting that Ayton still has to choose Atlanta, and that's a key thing for any sign and trade is that the player has a lot of agency in that. And then you need the Hawks to want to sign him, and you need the team, in this case the Suns, to cooperate and find a deal. I did have an extensive conversation about DeAndre Ayton along with other guys with Andrew Kelly earlier this month on this same feed. On the same feed is a 2-part podcast. I'm not going to do the entire thing here, but I definitely recommend listening to sort of the fake trade extravaganza there with myself and Andrew. We do a lot on Ayton on that podcast, but my shorter condensed thoughts are basically Ayton for me is not quite a star, but certainly a very good, like kind of fringy star, like a top 50-ish guy in the league right now, more than a top 25 guy. He's not quite on that level just yet, but obviously a former number one overall pick, a 23-year-old, very, very talented player. It's been very good, sort of a two-way guy also for Phoenix. I said this on the show with Andrew, but I want to say it one more time. I'm not sure the gap right now today between Capella and Ayton is as big as people might think that it is. I think Ayton is a better player, but not by just a gigantic margin. Now on offense, Ayton is a lot better than Capella. So don't get me wrong. He's a lot better, a lot more skilled, obviously. But Capella is an elite rebounder, maybe the best in the league. And for me, Capella right now today is a better defender than Ayton is. Now, a year from now, 2 years from now, that might not be the case. One of the things about trading for Ayton, if you want to go do that, is that he is very young. He's the same age as Trae, same draft class, of course, etc. So keep that all in mind. That's one of the reasons it's to be future facing. And so I'm not saying anything different. I think long term, clearly Ayton is a better asset, better contract, better player in the future than Capella is. So don't get me wrong. I'm talking about just right now today. And also, if you're trading for DeAndre Ayton, this is not like a scientific thing, but if you're going to do that, I think you kind of have to move Okongwu as well, because Ayton is older than Okongwu, but if you're going to invest what it takes, which is going to be a max contract, you would imagine, for DeAndre Ayton plus sign and trade assets, To have a Okongwu still on the team doesn't make a lot of sense to me as a backup center. Obviously, he would help you, but in terms of just asset management, you probably want to move on from him as well. So lots of moving parts if you were to do that. There is a price for me and where it would make sense to go out and get Ayton. I'm not saying otherwise because he is a pretty intriguing player, but certainly it would not be my priority necessarily. I think center is not really a huge concern for me if I am the Hawks at this moment in time. Ayton is a good player. He would fit well with Trae. I think that obviously there's some background stuff in that piece from Jake even about Phoenix and how that's all being handled. But it's on my radar for sure. And I definitely recommend listening to that podcast that I talked about with Andrew for even more on that subject. Elsewhere, though, from Jake in the piece that he wrote on Tuesday, he wrote a whole section in the piece about the Hawks in particular. I'm going to read some stuff here that he wrote and sort of interpret it again. One thing he wrote is that the Hawks are expected to be one of the more active teams this summer. Then he also wrote that behind the scenes, league insiders, there's that term again, consistently mention Atlanta as a team willing to make wholesale changes. That's interesting. And then lastly, in this section, he wrote that rival executives view all Hawks players, aside from Trae Young, as eligible to be traded, basically. And again, one more time now, Fischer is relaying things that he's hearing from league sources and league personnel, and that's not him reporting. Any of those three statements, by the way, that I just read off to you are not him reporting. That is him relaying other stuff that is out there. It still matters. I just want to put that out, but it's not quite the same thing as saying like him putting his name on it. We have been talking for a while though, as to the fact that the Trae being the only guy who's untouchable thing is not even anything approaching. I sort of got framed as being new today. I've said that a number of times on this show in the last couple of months, and even before that. I know Chris Kirschner wrote it as well this week. Like, that is not a secret. I think Trae is the only guy who is even remotely untouchable on this roster. Everybody else is very available. There are different layers of availability, to be sure, but that's not huge breaking news by any means if you're listening to this podcast or anything else. But it is interesting to read. For me, one of the more interesting things in the entire piece is the fact that the Hawks are seen as a team that is, quote, willing to make wholesale changes, end quote. Now, I have said this a few times already, but in listening to the public comments from Tony Ressler and Travis Schlenk in particular, and what I'm also hearing individually, the patience level at the top of the ownership or front office structure is not super high right now. They want results, and that actually might mean big changes, but big changes are often more difficult than people might believe that they are. So generally speaking, you're smart if you want to play the odds to default to teams not making big changes because they're just kind of hard to do. The Hawks certainly can do that, and it would not surprise me at all. But wholesale changes is a lot. Obviously, Trae's not going anywhere, but everybody else could be available on some level. There was one more thing from Ayton being a popular rumored target for Schlenk's front office. But here's one more thing that Jake wrote, quote, now, multiple league sources with knowledge of the Hawks' thinking have also pointed to various wing scorers as Atlanta's prioritized endgame, end quote. Now, that is quite interesting, and it also tracks with my own thinking and what we've been talking about on the podcast for a while. There are gaps on how good you might think DeAndre Ayton is and how much an upgrade that he would be at center. But generally speaking, he would be an upgrade. But again, center is not really the concern, broadly speaking. I think prioritizing the perimeter, both offense and defense, actually makes a lot more sense in a vacuum. Now, this is the NBA, so it's not a vacuum. Like, potentially, the best guy they can trade for is DeAndre Ayton. That's definitely on the table as a possibility. So it's not necessarily a linear thing where like you're choosing between Ayton and, as we'll talk about in a second, Zach LaVine. Like, those guys are available. I'd rather trade for LaVine probably just because of the fit and all that stuff. But it is an interesting situation because clearly Jake's, by the way, as a media nerd one more time, this is the strongest bit of wording from Jake in the entire thing about the Hawks is the fact that he cites multiple league sources with knowledge of the Hawks thinking. That's not the same thing as league sources or rival executives or whatever. That's more direct reporting. So interesting stuff there. Not hugely shocking, but still notable. And also, last thing on this segment, Jake reported that at this juncture, Bradley Beal and Donovan Mitchell are both, quote, expected to remain committed to Washington and Utah, end quote. But if any trade requests did arrive for either one of them, the Hawks, quote, could create as strong an offer as any suitor, end quote. So that's not even like relaying the Hawks are interested. It's just that they couldn't make an offer. I did talk about Mitchell a lot with Andrew on that podcast, and Beal has been a topic a lot of times in the last couple of years on this show. But basically, those two guys are in the category where they're going to have to ask out to be traded in all likelihood. So unless they do that, not really worth talking about a lot. But there was one big name that I sort of alluded to earlier, and it's Zach LaVine, which we're going to get to after the break because he's a guy that we did not talk about with Andrew. So I'm going to give you a little bit more depth on my thoughts about Zach LaVine and the potential there. But first, one more break to hear from our sponsors. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. Our partners over there at BetOnline have to be the number one source for everything you possibly need in the sports betting arena. That includes odds, futures, exotics, and much more. Find everything you need in sports betting, from the NBA playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, and odds, and all that fun stuff. They have fights, and even next season's NFL, college football, college basketball futures, among other things, even the hockey playoffs right now as well. They have wall-to-wall coverage of everything you want in sports, and they have all the wager information across the board. That includes live betting. They have the playoff stuff live and in person. Also, they have esports and more. And while basketball and baseball are getting a lot of attention at this point in time on the sporting calendar, all kinds of sports can catch the spotlight at BetOnline. BetOnline also has you covered for golf and tennis, auto racing, horse racing. They have soccer, cricket, hockey, entertainment bets, and any sport you can possibly think of. They have ping pong, all the auto racing you want. F1's popular these days. It's all available for you at BetOnline. Head there right now at BetOnline on your computer or mobile device to learn all about the trends and the action in the sports world. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, and as I said before the break, Zach LaVine is now a popular topic. He already kind of was in some respects, not really necessarily as popular on Twitter as guys like Ayton or Donovan Mitchell have been, or Shai Alexander, whoever else you want to say. But LaVine got thrown out there by Jake, and that means it's pretty interesting to talk about now. So what Jake wrote is the following. Atlanta has been mentioned by multiple league sources, there's that phrasing again, as a potential destination for Zach LaVine. So again, he's come up, but it felt like, as we'll get into in a second from Jake's reporting, that he was not going to be available probably with the way the Bulls played this year. They had a good season. He had a good season. They had DeRozan. They sort of went all in with Vucevic, all that stuff. But Jake wrote, I'm going to quote him again now, the premise that Zach LaVine's contract expiration would swiftly result in a lucrative extension with Chicago has dissolved, sources told Bleacher Report. However, the Bulls are still considered likely to retain LaVine on the open market. So, interesting sentiments there on both sides. It does seem pretty clear that the Bulls are the favorite still. They can offer him the most money, which is always important, and the most years. And LaVine's not as young as guys like Mitchell or Ayton. He's 27 years old. Last time, I promise, but the multiple league sources saying that Atlanta is, quote, a potential destination does not really mean anything. That's kind of just like people talking. That's not Jake reporting that. He's obviously passing it along, but that is a very, very, very soft language. So this does not qualify for me as a full-fledged Hawks want Zach LaVine rumor. We're not quite to that point, and I've sort of asked around. I couldn't really get traction for the people that I think that know things, let's just say. I didn't really get the feeling that the Hawks were all in on Zach LaVine. Let's just say that. That could change. It's May 24th as I'm recording this, but worth noting. Now, as for the Hawks and the fit, I'll add a couple more analysis points here, because we didn't talk about him with Andrew. So he's 27 in March. So he just turned 27. He'll be 28 next March. Sort of in his late prime for his next deal. He is a free agent, by the way. And unlike Ayton, he's unrestricted. So he can just leave at any moment that he wants to as of July 1st. He's come a long way as a player, for sure, which I'll come back to a few times. But LaVine was a guy who was sort of an empty calories guy early in his career in my mind. But he's definitely gotten a lot better, a lot more efficient, better defender than he used to be, et cetera. There are some injury questions, some durability questions. Last 6 seasons, he's averaged 53 games a year. Now, a couple of those seasons were limited non-82 game seasons, but he's definitely missed, that 20 to 25 games per season mark the last 6 years, which is certainly not what you want ideally for the Hawks to be your second best player, obviously. He's also has a current knee issue. He's going to have a scope in the offseason on some level. It seems like it's not serious, but anytime you have a guy who's athletic and has been jumping and running a lot and for a long time, and knee stuff, he was sort of hampered by it during the season this year. It's a question. I'm not saying it's a panic thing, but certainly not what you want to see from a guy who's 27, maybe 28 pretty soon. Contractually, LaVine is almost certainly going to be getting a full max contract from whoever, whether it's a 4 or 5 year deal from the Bulls, 4-year deal from somebody else. It's a lot of money, obviously. He might get a player option as well, but he's a star level player. I will say, though, the Hawks cannot just sign him. They don't have cap space, as we talked about before. They are way over the cap and in the luxury tax at this moment in time. So it has to be a sign and trade. Generally speaking, this goes for the Ayton pursuit as well. Sign and trades usually do not yield fantastic returns for the team that's sending the player out, because they're just trying to get something back. The leverage point is not super high there. So if you see a rumor about the Hawks trading like 5 assets for Zach LaVine, that's not going to be what it takes, most likely, because it would require LaVine wanting to go to Atlanta, and also the Bulls realizing that he's going to leave and try to get something back. It won't be full price. It usually is not. In fact, I can kind of like one hand how many sign trades have been full price returns in the last, decade plus for anybody in the entire NBA. So generally speaking, I think LaVine is a better player than Ayton right now. There's not obviously not a one-to-one comparison, but it's just one of those things. Now, I do think that he checks a box with his scoring. That's a much bigger concern than what Ayton will be doing at center to upgrade. But he's 4 years older. There's more downside risk there between age and injury and defense, etc. Offensively, though, LaVine is awesome. He made it clearly the last 3 or 4 years in Chicago. Last 3 seasons, he's averaged 26 points a game, 48% from the floor, 40% from three, 84% from the line. He's an elite shooter. 60% true shooting over 3 seasons with 30% usage that's star level stuff. Now, he's not a top 10 player, not a top 20 player probably for me, but he's certainly in that top 30-ish kind of group. He's not as good as Trae, but he's a lot better than what the Hawks have now. Even if you're the biggest John Collins fan, LaVine's a better player, just very clearly. So all that said, like, he's a solid enough passer as well, someone who can play on the ball a little bit, but certainly very comfortable working off the ball as a shooter, spacer, can finish around the rim with his length and his obviously a former dunk champion, all that stuff. Without going crazy deep into the fit, he would be a great fit with Trae offensively for sure, handling the scoring low when Trae leaves the floor, playing off of him as well. Would immediately be the best backcourt in the league offensively, I think pretty comfortably because of how good Trae already is, and LaVine's really good as well. Defensively would be a question. I saw people sort of equating him and Mitchell as defenders. I've long said that Donovan Mitchell's very bad defensively. I think LaVine is also pretty bad, but also better than Mitchell. I think he's come a long way. Now, 4 years ago, 3 years ago even, I would have said LaVine was terrible defensively, and he was. He's got more size, and he's got more sort of off-ball defensive stuff, more juice, more athleticism, all that stuff than a guy like Mitchell who's too small. So all that said, like, he is not a good defender. You could say there's varying levels of negative. He's not as bad as Trae. He's not as bad as some of those other guys. He's got all this sort of physical tools. And maybe you would think that if he's playing the number 2 role clearly to someone like Trae, maybe he can defend a little bit better. For example, EPM, a trusted metric, they had him as like the 40th percentile defender this year, which is below average, but not terrible. Raptor was worse than that, just to be fair. Still a bad defender, but not someone who is quite as bad as some of the other sort of nuclear defensive options. It would be a problem on some level. They have to scheme around it at the same time because the offense would be so interesting. There's some trade-off there. In the playoffs, would it be hard to hide both of them at the same time? Yes, it would be. But, none of these guys are perfect unless you're trading for the guys that are not available. So all that said, I think he would be a fit that would work. The questions would be, though, in some order, defense, age, and knee issues. Those are the 3 ones. And age right now is not really a problem. But if you're going to give him a 4-year contract, by the end of it, age 38, 31, he might not be quite the same guy. And you're paying him lots of money to be the max. Now, that's part of the deal in the NBA. You got to pay for what you have now and sort of deal with it down the line. So overall, though, I would be intrigued by LaVine. I think it would be a very aggressive move from the Hawks in the short term because realistically, again, he's probably going to be worse 2 years from now than he is now. I say probably. It's not definitely. He's most likely probably going to be worse, but not necessarily the case. But he's a better fit than someone like Mitchell, in my mind, pretty clearly. And at least to me, he brings a higher ceiling to the table than some of the Gobert or Ayton proposals. Like, those guys are really good players, and they're better than what the Hawks have. But for me, I think the Hawks' path to title contention success probably is not going to be just like getting a rim running center. And I think Ayton's a little bit better than offensively, but I think that, and obviously defensively, those guys would be pretty good. But in terms of just like ceiling, if you could turn a couple assets into Zach LaVine, I think your ceiling is probably higher than if you're doing the same kind of thing to upgrade from Capella to someone like Ayton or someone like Gobert. So all that said, it's all about nuance. It's all about what the trade would be, what the deal would look like. We don't know that stuff yet, but that's my overarching thought on LaVine at this point in time, because I did not talk about him on the podcast with Andrew Kelly. So a busy day. I will once again stress before we get out of here, there is nothing that I would say has risen anywhere close to the level of an actual rumor about the Atlanta Hawks right now. Jake is very smart and plugged in, but everything that he passed along on the individual players is not really rumor stuff. It's more like the Hawks might be interested in these guys, which makes sense. The one thing that he did kind of report more firmly was the thing about the Hawks prioritizing the perimeter. I do believe that. I've heard the same, so that does not surprise me at all. But we're not quite to full rumor mode at this point in time. But listen, there's still 4 weeks till the draft. There's a long way to go here before anything's probably going to happen. So keep the faith if you're a Hawks fan. I know Hawks fans love talking about this stuff, and I totally get it. But yeah, that's where we are right now. Hopefully, fake trade stuff will be a little bit on the back burner for a little while longer as the draft approaches. But we'll still be here. If there's any real rumors, I'll definitely get into the mix and talk about them. But at the end of the day, a busy Tuesday into Wednesday for the Hawks on some level, with Trae making a bunch more money, getting a big time league honor, and then also some trade stuff at the end of the podcast. So please subscribe to this show on any podcast platform that you prefer, but certainly including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, especially. If you're listening to this on audio-only feed, it does not hurt you in any way to subscribe on YouTube. That's definitely helpful to grow the product in some form or fashion. You can also look at me on screen. My apologies for that if you're watching on the YouTube channel right now. But also leave 5-star reviews. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. We'll have at least one more show this week, maybe even two, but certainly at least one. I have a couple more that are banked, and the next week will be sort of the same thing with Memorial Day and some travel for me. So be flexible. I'll probably have to schedule some stuff out, so hopefully no huge breaking news. But be patient with me, and please subscribe to the podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time.